During the process of making my magazine, I asked for feedback along the way. This was really useful given that I learned a lot from this feedback and it helped me learn about specific ways in which I could improve my magazine. This shows the first attempt of my magazine. The first feedback I received was that the way in which the image had two people on was not conventional. I learnt that it would have been more effective to use one person on the image, and it also would have made it easier to edit the magazine given that I wouldn't have to worry about positioning the text around two people's faces. Therefore, this was something I learnt from the initial feedback I got from my magazine. As you can see, the way in which I then changed the image so that it was only featuring one person shows how I learnt and progressed my work based on the audience feedback I had received. However, I was also informed that the picture I had used on this magazine was not that effective given that it did not use the direct mode of address. This therefore meant that as an audience member you did not feel like the magazine was directly targeting you. Therefore, from this audience feedback I learnt that in order to make this magazine more effective, I should have used an image that used the direct mode of address, given that this would address the consumer, thus making them more engaged and interested in the magazine. You can see from the new photo that I took that I had listened and learnt from the feedback that I have received, given that this new photo used the direct mode of address to address the consumer. However, my target audience was still not happy with my photo editing, and therefore they suggested that I should edit the photo in order to make it more conventional to the thriller genre, and thus help the audience to understand that it was a thriller film being promoted. Therefore, I learnt that although this image was a lot better in terms of the way that it addressed the consumer, it was still not that effective, given that it did not clearly help the audience to decode what genre film was being promoted. As you can see, my new attempt of the product was a lot better in terms of conforming to the conventions of the thriller genre with the image editing. Therefore, it is possible to say that because of audience feedback, I learnt how I should edit my image in order to make my product more conventional to the genre. This would also improve the quality of my product and enhance the amount of people that were engaged within my product, given that it clearly communicated and encoded meaning about the narrative and genre of the film I was promoting. However, my target audience did inform me of the fact that the masthead was not well constructed in this trial. They informed me that the masthead being black was not good, given that the blue background in which it was placed upon meant that the masthead could not stand out. This therefore made the magazine look less professional, thus meaning that I needed to learn how to edit the masthead in a way that was going to make it stand out from the background and thus make my magazine look more professional. You can see from the way in which I have added a gradient layer onto the typeface to make the typeface white shows how I have learnt from my audience feedback. It shows that I learnt how my masthead was not standing out enough from the page at the moment, meaning that my magazine did not look professional. Therefore, this shows how I learnt how I could improve my product by changing the colour of the typeface in order to ensure that my information is clearly read and thus mean that my magazine looks more professional. One thing that I had experimented a lot with was the typeface used for the masthead. I wanted to gain audience feedback from this and learn which masthead I'd currently use was most effective. From the audience feedback I received, I was informed that the masthead is normally of a magazine company, and therefore the way in which I had made my own masthead up was not that conventional. Therefore, I was informed that my work would have looked more conventional and professional if I'd have used a real magazine company. Therefore, in order to improve this, I learnt about how I could choose and select a company to promote my film and therefore build and create the logo using Photoshop. This was something really useful that I learnt from my audience feedback in order to improve the quality of my magazine and make it look a lot more professional. As you can see, the way in which I learnt to include a masthead of a film company made my magazine look a lot more professional. However, I also learnt from this initial draft that I should include some pictures from the film. I was informed that it's conventional to include action shots from the trailer, given that it gives the audience an insight in what's the film going to be about. Therefore, I learnt that in order to improve and enhance the quality of my product, I should look to including these extra additional images, which is what I did. As you can see, the way in which I have included these additional action shots from my film improves the quality of my work. It shows how I've been able to learn from what my audience feedback said in order to make my product look more like a magazine and thus conform to more conventions of a magazine front cover. It also shows that I was able to learn from what my audience feedback said in order to ensure that my product appealed to my target demographic. This shows how my audience feedback was really useful, given that it gave me direct and specific feedback on features to include and take away to ensure that the quality of my work was enhanced. I learnt that although my magazine had improved significantly from my first attempt, there were still some ways in which I could improve it further. My audience feedback informed me of the fact that the subject looked a bit merged within the background. Therefore, I learnt that in order to make my subject look more real and stand out from the page, I should separate the background from the subject, ensuring I can place the masthead in between the background and the subject. Here you can see the way in which I have learnt from my audience feedback and edited my image so that my subject stands out from the background more, having successfully improved the quality of my work. It ensures people are more attracted to the magazine given that the subject stands out of the background and thus grabs their attention more easily. This therefore shows how I learnt from audience feedback and was able to make my magazine better and ensure that more people paid interest in my magazine. However, I did learn that the way in which I had included the antagonist on my magazine front cover was not conventional. I learned from my audience feedback that it would have been better to include the protagonist on the front cover, given that this would have then created an easily identifiable, recognisable face that the audience would have been able to use to identify the film. Therefore, based on this feedback, I learnt that in order to improve my product even further, I should go back and edit a picture of my protagonist in order to make my magazine more conventional and more easy for the audience to decode and understand. Therefore, as you can see, the way in which I have now included the central protagonist on the front cover makes the magazine a lot more easy to identify. It shows how I have listened to my audience feedback and learnt from what they told me in order to ensure that when people see the magazine on the shelf, they will recognise the film from the protagonist's face, which is also on the poster. This therefore shows how I've also been able to use my audience feedback in order to create better continuity between my advertising products, thus enforcing the fact that they are all under the same marketing campaign and all promoting the same film. This therefore shows how I was really able to learn from my audience feedback and help improve specific parts of my work to ensure that the quality of my magazine was as high as possible. Another piece of feedback that I received from this version was relating to the fact that my magazine looked too busy. Therefore, I learnt that in order to improve the quality of my magazine and make my product better, I should remove some of the information such as the strap lines. This would therefore mean that the magazine is less overwhelming for the audience, meaning that they may feel more inclined to look and decode the information on the magazine, given that it is less overwhelming and easier to read. By taking information away, it would also ensure that my audience knew what to look at more easily, thus meaning that my magazine in general would be easier to read. As you can see, the way in which I have removed some of the straplines makes the magazine look slightly less busy. This therefore shows how I have learnt from the audience feedback that I received in order to edit and adjust some of my features on my magazine to ensure that my magazine is of best quality as possible. This therefore shows how I was able to take into consideration what I'd learnt from my audience feedback and edit specific parts of my magazine to improve the quality of my magazine. It also shows how I was able to bear in mind the consumer when editing my magazine, given that this audience feedback taught me how to edit the magazine in order to make it easier for my consumer to read. This therefore shows how I learnt a lot of things from my audience feedback, from editing the image to arrangement of information on the page so that my magazine is easy for my audience to read.